Today we are going to discuss about chapter number 8 of the book Writing for Computer Science by Justin Zobel. In this chapter he discusses about punctuations, when to use a comma, when to use a colon, when to use a semicolon, and so on. So here he is briefing us to make things understandable for a reader, right, is to keep the punctuations appropriately. Without appropriate punctuations, it will become very difficult to read. The whole concept becomes tough for the reader to understand. So let's start with some fonts and formatting issues. There are different types of fonts. You can use some plain font, italic format, bold, underline, and so on. When to use what depends on the structure of your publisher. Okay, format. Follow their format. Also, don't overdo with parentheses, with the quotes, with hyphen, with the semicolon, and so on. Don't overdo them. For any paper you write, make sure they have page numbers. So it's easy for the reviewer as well as for you to figure out if there is any error in any specific page number. What about full stops or periods or stops? These are used like things to stop. Stops are used for abbreviation. They are also used for acronyms. You can also use them as ellipses, which is 3 dots. And they also occur at the end of the sentence. If suppose you have a sentence, inside that you have another sentence, and the inner sentence has a full stop, and the inner sentence ends at the end of the first sentence. Here is an example. The process required less than a second, except when the machine was heavily loaded, the network was saturated, etc. So you can see there is a second sentence like, in the brackets, there is a full stop up there. At the end of etc, there is a full stop. And at the end, there is another full stop. So actually, we don't need double full stop. You can remove the inside ones and keep the outside one. So you can rephrase it in such a way, unless, for example, the machine was heavily loaded or the network was saturated. If you are writing some headings, some titles, they don't have full stop. Okay, don't use full stop even if it's an end of a sentence line. Neural nets for image classification, there is no full stop at the end. What about comma? Here is a statement. The 4 processes that use the network are almost never idle. The same sentence, if you write it like this, the 4 processes which use the network are almost idle. So the question is, are you talking about that there are only 4 processes? Or you are saying there are many processes out of which you are choosing 4 of them? So here in the first case, the 4 processes that use the network. This clearly means of the 4 processes, the 4 that use the network. So there are many processes. Out of them, 4 that use the network are almost never idle. The second case, the 4 processes which use the network. So here means the 4 processes use the network. So there are 4 processes which use the network. Talking about comma, the process may be waiting for a signal or even if processing input. So this part looks very unclear. Instead you can say or even if processing input. So segregate them, separate them by using this comma. The comma makes things clear. And don't use too many commas, okay? Use minimum comma so that it will prevent you from being ambiguous. Here is an example. When using disk tree algorithms. Do you mean by disk tree algorithms? Is there something like disk tree algorithm? Basically, you should write when using disk tree algorithms. So there is nothing like disk tree algorithms. One node was allocated for each of the states, but of the 9, 7 were not used. So if you say of the 9, then you put a comma, then say 7 were not used. Or you can rephrase it. 9 nodes were allocated, 1 for each of the states, but 7 were not used. There is a concept called serial comma. We use comma, comma, comma continuously. The last comma we omit it. The author states omitting the last comma is of no use. It only creates some kind of damage and it does not support you. So don't remove it, keep it there. This is what he is saying. Here is an example. If you see at this stage, The alternatives were to branch to the left, back up one step, and branch to the right. Insert a new value or increment the failure counter. So here if you see, here is the last part. The last comma should be here, okay, between the value and or. If you remove it, it will confuse you. So it's better to use the comma there, okay. Don't omit the last comma. Here is another example. If you have a long sentence like this, as illustrated by the techniques listed at the end of the section, there are recent advances in parallel algorithms and multiprocessor hardware. If you keep going like this, the reader will be lost. So it's better to say as illustrated by the techniques listed at the end of the section, comma, and keep going. Separate them with comma and make it clear for reader. Comma, colons and semicolon. You can use colon if you want to join related statements. Here is an example. These small additional structures allow a large saving. The worst case is reduced. So you are talking about the worst case in case of the additional structure. You can use colon to also come up with some list. There are 3 phases. So colon, then the first phase, second phase, third phase. Sometimes you separate the list instead of by comma with a semicolon. Why? If the list itself contains a comma, it is good to separate the list with semicolon. So you can have comma inside the list. Here is an example. Accumulation of distinct symbols in a hash table, semicolon. The second one has a comma inside. Okay. So semicolon is a segregation and comma is just part of the list itself. If you have long sentences, you can use semicolon to split them. And also you can use it to give some emphasis. In theory, the algorithm would be more efficient with an array, but in practice. So here I'm emphasizing it here. Practice, a tree is practicable, or a tree is preferable. What about apostrophes? If you have singular possessive, then you can have s with apostrophe, like students, apostrophe s. And Sue and links. So you can write Sue's and links methods, fine as well. If the name ends with the S, you will remove, you don't use the S, you only use apostrophe. Okay, if you are not sure, it is better to use the S. About plural possessiveness, okay, like students' passwords. So here, students is a plural, so you don't put the S here. There's no S here, you only have the apostrophe. Pronoun possessive, they have no apostrophe. It's like it's, you don't say it apostrophe s. This is meaning it apostrophe s means it is. And in technical writing, don't do contractions. Don't do like this. Write it clearly. It is blue. Also things like in the 1980s, apostrophe s, each of the CPUs, computers, process, like this are all incorrect. Okay, and the author says don't use them. What about exclamation? Author suggests us not to use exclamatory mark, even one time. Okay, even one exclamation. Never use a double one. Okay, so sometimes it is needed. Probably you will use it, but you can rephrase it. Performance deteriorated after addition of resources. So you can say remarkably, performance deteriorated after addition of resources. What about hyphenation? If you use data, space base, data, dash base, or database together, you can use any one of them, but be consistent throughout your text. The use of hyphen is basically to override right associativity. Meaning, if I have a word like this, it means randomized data structure. So if I want to say randomized data, I want to combine these two together, then I should add an hyphen here. Okay. By default, hyphen takes right associativity. If you want to say array-based data structure, so it's good to say array-based because we want this to be associated, not based with the data, right? And for example, if you are saying binary tree-based data structure, it will confuse. So it's better to be written as data structure based on binary trees. And using automatic hyphenation, it's not always right. Like hyphen here, like available, like this. These are correct. No problem, machine available. But at the same time, there are cases where you will find the hyphen added by the software is not right. And you can use hyphen to join words, You can use range numbers like from 120 to 130 page number, which is using n dash, and you also have punctuation, which is m dash. Capitalization. What should be capitalized? What should not be capitalized? Capitalize only proper nouns. So in this example, the extensible hashing method, don't capitalize anything. You just have to put them in lower case. If you are referring to a theorem, a figure, you can capitalize them. Okay. If you have a colon, immediately after the colon, capitalize them. And capitalize things other than articles, conjunction, and preposition. Even these, you can capitalize them if they have more than 3 alphabets long. They are more than 3 letters. You can use capitalization. For sections, you can use maximum capitalization. For subsections, reduce the capitalization, and so on. Okay? Don't do the opposite. Like subsection is all capital and the main section is not. Okay? Don't do the opposite. What about quotations? Sometimes we even use quotations not because we copy from somebody else's text. It is our own statement, but yet you can use quotes. This is like emphasizing. If you are having literal string, for example, for is based on a keyword in a language. It's a literal string. Don't use a dot. So if you put a dot inside the quote, it means like the literal string includes a dot, which is not true. So keep the dot, the stop, outside the literal string, or try to remove the literal string with the quotes itself. Please watch out for ASCII double quote symbols like this. It is a straight one and an angled or a smart quote. They are different. So when you type in, be careful about what you're using. About parentheses. If you have parentheses in a sentence, okay, punctuate them as if you will punctuate without the parentheses. Here is an example. Most quantities are small, but there are exceptions. Don't put full stop here. Put the full stop outside, because if the brackets are not there, the full stop will be outside. Okay, but if you have a full sentence like this, everything, the whole sentence is inside, then you can put the full stop inside. Okay, this is the difference between when to use a full stop along with the parenthesis. If you have some important text, never put them in parenthesis. Why? Parenthesis means the text inside it helps you to understand it better. You can just ignore that sentence, which is inside the parenthesis, but yet the whole paragraph, whole thing should make meaning out of it, should be clear to you. Don't make too many parentheses inside a paragraph or inside a page. Don't use kind of this bracket S to indicate plural. This looks ugly, so the authors prefer not to use this. What about punctuations? What about citations? If you consider into such cases like this, by the way, punctuations or citations, when you punctuate them like this, if you remove them, the sentence should make a clear meaning. Like the parenthesis. I can remove the parenthetical remark, yet I can read the sentence. So here if I remove, in such cases, it is incomplete. So don't write your citation like this. Okay? It is better to keep them separately. Such cases have been shown in this. Or you say Wilson has shown. So number 2 is in brackets. Even if you remove the number 2, the sentence is complete, and so on. Okay. So don't consider things inside the bracket as like a part of the sentence, as a word of the sentence. How about citation? If I'm going to give some citation, please cite to the material, to the part of the message which is related to the paper itself. Like here is an example. The original algorithm has asymptotic cost but low memory usage. So it is not entirely superseded by Olberg's approach, which although of cost this requires a large in-memory array. Question. Did Olberg consider that array as a problem? Okay. And he does not describe anything about the old approach. Okay. He does not. So this is misleading. Don't keep these two together. The sentence is of 2 people, so you can split them appropriately. The original algorithm has been this, as asymptotic cost of this, but low memory usage. This is done by this guy. This is referred or this is cited by this paper, Keeley, 1989. Thus, it is not entirely superseded by this approach. Okay. So use appropriate citation based on the requirements of your journal or your conference, the style of citation, and represent the citation as close as possible to the material itself. So this is a summary of these punctuations. So watch out when to use punctuation, where to use punctuation. Don't overdo punctuations, right? Punctuations can also mislead you. So use of colon, use of comma, use of full stop, use of semicolon, all these has to be studied properly. Thank you.